The Boy and the Heron is a thematically rich movie. And I went into it expecting it to be not that great, but I walk away from the movie thinking that it's one of Miyazaki's best and could easily be up there with my favorite of the Ghibli films. Um, and I think we run into a certain kind of danger when working on interpreting themes because we're beginning to put them into our language, and what's happening in the story is more than my articulation of the story. So there's going to be a certain amount of like reduction that happens no matter what. But that being said, um, what Mahito experiences in the beginning of the story with the death of his mother develops in him a strained relationship with reality. And the more malice that develops in his heart through his actions and through his relationships with others, the closer it is that he gets to entering into a fantasy world altogether. I think in the Japanese, the name of the movie is How Will You Live, or something like that, which is the title of the book that his mother gave him. When Mahito makes it into the tower world, just before he does that in the plot, he is reading the book that his mother gave him, and he stops reading the book. He leaves the book open halfway through. In the story, what we find out about the great granduncle before he became the master of this fantasy world, like a Willy Wonka of sorts, is that he was reading many, many books, and that there was one book that he never finished, and then he left it open and just disappeared. And so there's a connection between the book that Mahito was reading, the book that his great granduncle was reading, and the book that his mom gave him. You see? So, what am I talking about here? And the name of the book is How Will You Live? Mahito's mom, there's a question mark on Mahito's life. How will Mahito choose to live? We don't know how he will choose to live because he's entered into the fantasy world. But he has a choice. He can continue on in the fantasy world, or he can come out of it. But if he doesn't come out of the fantasy world, he'll never finish the book. His mother did finish the book, and she gave it to him. And we know that she gave him the book because she went through the door to become his mom. Okay, so that sentence might have sounded kind of convoluted. Of course we know she gave it to him, but what I mean is we know how she lived her life. And that is, she became Mahito's mom. She wanted to do that. It seems like everybody in this family, to some degree or another, has to enter into the tower world, or whatever it's called, at some point in time. That one of the grannies said that, maybe it was Kiriko, who said that the Tower Master's voice can only be heard of their bloodline. So that means Mahito, Natsuko, his mom, Himi, whatever, and great granduncle can all hear the voice. Of course, he is the voice. And so, in some kind of way, there's also this like understanding that like the struggles that you have or the tendencies that you have, or the journeys that you have to go through, are also the types of endeavors that people in your bloodline have to undertake. Great granduncle made his choice, and Princess Hime made hers, and Natsuko made hers, and ultimately Mahito made his. And one thing that you'll notice is that great granduncle Mahito's, his mom, and his new mom's choices are all interconnected within this one world. The choices that one makes is connected with the choices that the other one makes. So what got Natsuko into this world were two things. This is the aunt. The two things that got Natsuko into this world was, one, the grief that she feels over the loss of her sister, connected with the responsibility to take care of her son, and connected with that is his attitude towards her. He doesn't respect her. He only does out of duty. And then thirdly, it's her own fear of having to raise a child, give birth to a child and raise that child. And this fear of giving birth to and raising a child is connected with Princess Hime, because she knows what happened with her sister. So in order to bring another life into the world, you have to be willing to take the risk that something horrible is going to go down. And so in the case of her mom, in the case of Princess Hime, she died. And that really grieved her sister. And so I'm sure that on some level she doesn't want Mahito and whatever the baby's name ends up being to experience that kind of grief. So there's this, again, the fantasy world is connected with things that we just can't handle. What it is that caused Princess Hime to enter into that fantasy world, I'm not sure we know. And maybe watching it again will reveal that. But I didn't see it. I didn't see what it was that led Princess Hime in there. Just know that she did it. And she came out and she's able to give the book to her son. Mahito, has to learn how to deal with his new reality, which is a reality that he does not want to accept. This is a reality of a new mom. This is the reality of the passing of a mom. This is a reality of a whole new family with a new baby. And this is the reality of his dad loving someone else who's not his mom. And in fact, it's actually his mom's sister. So moving along here, thematically, let's take the episode with the pelicans. And let's take the end of that episode. So the movie is structured like from start to finish. There's like one overarching storyline, but it's like told in sections. So there's like from the tragedy up to the boy responding to the invitation of the Heron, ultimately responding to it. I guess the beginning of the quest to save Natsuko. And then he goes through the first tier of like that sea world that he ends up in. And I guess it's all like one world. Like he just kind of teleports around in it. And the different phases of the movie are actually kind of like told by birds. And so the first phase you have is the gray heron. And then after the gray heron is the pelicans. And then after the pelicans is the parakeets. During the pelican phase, at the end of the pelican phase, you have the warawara that are floating up to become babies. And then right in the very middle of this extremely beautiful process, this awe-inspiring event occurring, these pelicans come up out of nowhere and they start gobbling them up. Based on our first encounter with the pelicans, we already began to feel something that was like strange or wrong about them being around. But when the pelicans begin to eat the warawara, then we definitely feel like this is something antagonistic. This is an enemy of sorts. We should feel, at least I felt when I was watching the movie, threatened. I felt threatened seeing the pelicans. They felt strange. But Mahito, in his curiosity, walks out and he sees a dying pelican and he talks with it. And he comes to find out that the pelican is just doing what it's made to do. It didn't ask to be there, and it has to survive somehow. Pelicans don't go after the warawara because they hate them, and they don't go after the warawara in some kind of effort to manipulate reality. The pelicans and the warawara, both in the warawara's process and in the pelican's own process, the event of their being is in line with reality. And when Mahito acknowledges in the pelican that there was no malice in it, he honored the pelican by burying it because it's a part of nature, which is good. There's nothing actually evil or malicious, rather, about the pelicans. That particular event, I think, was very important for Mahito. In his journey, because it taught him, I think, to see and to accept death not as as something necessarily malevolent, but as something kind of a part of the circle of life. Let's see what else in the movie. At the beginning of the pelican part, there was that really strange scene when he's on that island and he walks up to that gate. Do you remember what the gate said? It said something like, "Those who desire my knowledge shall die." And then the pelicans, who are just like flying appetites, shove the boy through the gate and open it. So he's entered into some kind of dangerous, forbidden land. And you can even see inside that altar space there was some kind of like mysterious glowing, like something was beginning to be activated. And then Kiriko shows up. She pushes away all of the pelicans and performs some kind of ritual very precisely, and then gives Mahito specific steps to get out of the situation that he's in. He has to walk backwards and do what it is that she's having him do. And then she asks him what's up and what happened. So in that kind of situation, where you have some kind of like force of nature, like whatever it is, this mysterious force that's inside the altar, it is a knowledge that is beyond human capacity. But because of the natural forces that are in this world, and maybe even our kind of curious proximity to those places, sometimes I think human beings find themselves thrusted into a danger zone that they were curious about, not a danger zone that they're necessarily seeking out. And their life is in trouble. And when Kiriko, who is one of the grannies, but this is like a younger version of her, shows up, she enters from off the ocean onto this island that he is on. It's almost like she's coming from a different dimension. She comes into the world that he's in, and she pulls him out. Kiriko in that moment does the work of like an angel or a prophet. And she shows up, realizing more than this boy understands, and gives him very specific instructions for how to get out. Let's see. And also part of him moving on with life and getting out of the dangerous situation he's in. I think that's even the part where she said that he smelled of death or something like that. So he ended up on this like death island because he had something in common with it. So by her intervention and because of her help, she pulls him out of that situation. And then she proceeds to show him just the ways of the world. They fish, they prepare food, they feed other things other than themselves. And he learns about the circle of life. Some other themes I think I would like to take into consideration or better understand is the role, or at least the symbol of fire, and how it is that this fire, like when Princess Himi shows up, she rescues the Warawara by basically exploding like giant beautiful fireworks onto the pelicans. But the fire ends up killing both the pelicans and the Warawara. And it's the same fire that ultimately ended up killing Mahito's mom in the hospital fire. So we have even something like fire, which is like almost exclusively destructive, being purposed both for death and for life, for the protecting of life. What else? We'll get there. My favorite thing about the movie, this is a side note, it's not about the themes. My favorite thing about the movie is the fact that the parakeets always breathe through their noses. So the voice actors who are playing the parakeets, whenever they're on, you hear this. That's like the voice acting job that the parakeets do. And then the other best thing were the grannies. They were so wonderful. And they really did. They were like guardian spirits. They were like angels. They were totally pure. They had ancient knowledge. They had insight to the mysteries of the unknown. I mean, they got a lot more than you understood. And they were there to protect. And they had been in the business of protecting this family throughout the known links in the genetic line. The risk that Mahito has to take in order to get back into reality, to accept reality for what it is that it is a world with death in it. He has to go back to a world where his mom is gone. And there's a question mark, at least throughout the course of the movie up until the very end, on whether or not he's actually going to do that. Is that life worth living? And it's very, very beautiful to see that his young mother, Princess Himi, knowing that she is going to die in a fire, would choose that life. She would have knowledge of that life, and then she would choose it. That it would be worth it just to be Mahito's mom. A lot of people that I know, married couples or unmarried couples, or just unmarried people in general, want nothing to do with having kids. And a lot of otherwise responsible married couples will put off having kids for like ever, even though they're already like set and secured with jobs better than anyone on the timeline of their ancestry has ever had. And what you tend to find, what I have found out when I talk with these people is that one of the answers is that they're afraid, like it's going to be inconvenient, right? Like financially difficult to pull this off, or it'll be stress on their comfort levels. Some people deal with trauma, and I have met people before who don't want to give to their kids the life that they were given by their parents. And then, like, one lady I talked to one time said that she didn't want to have kids. Well, part of her answer was she didn't want to have kids because she wanted to have fun for the rest of her life and live for herself and go to music shows and be an actress. But then, like, on pressing the matter in a moment of honesty, she told me that she didn't want to have kids because she didn't want them to look like her. So you have all these forms of, like, I guess, pain or suffering or harsh realities. The loss of comfort, inconvenience, the unknown when it comes to having the right, like, your finances and stuff. The fear, oh goodness, that your kids might actually look like you. Superfluous things like this. Well, not to say that they're ultimately, they're not superfluous in that they aren't real reasons and that they aren't real struggles that people have to get through. That's the whole point of the movie. But the ultimate conclusion that you have to come to is it worth it? And Mahito's mom said, yes, it is worth it. I would die for you. On the great-granduncle, I think with the framework that I've been setting up, it's easy to think that the great-granduncle chose not to embrace or to engage reality. But the interesting thing about him, though, is that if it wasn't for his fantasy world that he constructed, I think, that whole experience plays a part in Natsuko, the mom, and Mahito's embrace of reality. He's a very enigmatic figure, and on some level, he seems to grow somewhat with the different blocks that he was using. His intention doesn't necessarily seem to be impure. He seems to be aware of more of what's actually going on. And so, I guess with that to say, when it comes to the great-granduncle, where I stand right now in this time, at this night, in this city, on this camera, in this bed, is that he's an enigma, and that I don't think it's fair to come to any kind of particular conclusion just yet based on what I know about the great-granduncle. Did I already talk about Natsuko? Natsuko's afraid of having a kid. She was afraid of putting Mahito through what his mother put him through. She's also afraid of possibly even the cost of dying. She's because she's not well. She's dealing with morning sickness. I'm sure it's like a fear that mothers have to pass through. Some of them is this risk of death of the one that's loved, death of the self. Who's gonna die? Whose life are you gonna give up? You gonna give up yours, or you're gonna give up the baby's? And so she had to come through that, but her ability to come through that decision happened because of both Himi's scandalous intervention and Mahito's taboo intervention. And there's that. It was kind of beautiful when he started calling her mother, but then he started calling her Natsuko mother, so like she's his mom, but she's like different from his mom, but she's still his mom. And again, the interconnecting, the web of the relationships between these characters, you see. Where's I going with this? Oh, camera. Forgetfulness. Let's see. Natsuko got in there because of Mahito, and she got out of there because of Mahito. Mahito got in there because of his mom, and he got out of there because of his mom. Natsuko went in there because of his mom, and she got out of there because of his mom. And all of them got in there because of the great-granduncle. And all of them were protected through the process because of the grannies. All of them were invited into this space. I'm assuming all of them were invited into this space because of the great Heron. So what about the rock? What about the king parakeet? And I'm sure he's like, him and their little society is like essential to understanding the fantasy world that the wizard uncle created. The building blocks, the ascent of death, and the connection between death and malice, and who does and does not get to decide what reality is. Maybe even in the someone taking on the role of creating an alternate world, by like default, the building blocks of that world have malice in them. But the one who refuses to take on the role of building that because of the impurities that's in the one, the unworthiness of the one to build that world, the unworthiness of the one to play God, the unworthiness of the one to say what is and is not reality. Where's I going with this? Would cause them to see the good that there is in the reality past the other things that happen in it. And then he walks out with that little building block. What's that going to build? He can't create a world. He can't be the architect of a world with that little block. But he can be a piece in that world. Or rather, maybe that's not a good analogy. No one wants to be a piece in a world or a brick in a wall. Or a cog in a machine. But he does have the ability to place his block somewhere and to build up other blocks. And I'm sure that thematically his mom has had her own block. His aunt has her own block. His dad has his own block. The grannies all have their own blocks. Alright, there it is.